is a house built out of stone. Wooden floors, walls, and windows.
What is your definition of home?
That's so interesting of a question. I would really just say that home is just the place or places that you feel connected.
This is a place where I don't feel alone.
Of home?
Home, yeah.
A place that you live and you have like your family. I guess that's it.
Go to a place you feel comfortable sharing your hard times and hardships, and also a time to rejoice. So I think basically it's a community.
And home is something that our clients had to leave, but it's also something that they make and that they can make here. Right? So I'm the executive director of Bridge, and Bridge has been in Knoxville since 1983, and since then has resettled thousands of refugees in the Knoxville community. So a refugee is a legal definition, and it's defined by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, but it's someone who's persecuted based on something they can't change, so race, nationality, religion, membership in a social group, or political affiliation, and they are forced to leave their home, and they leave their country and are in a second country. So refugee crosses a border, and once they are a refugee, UNHCR works with the country that they're in, depending on where it is in the world, on a durable solution. And the main durable solutions are repatriation, so if it's possible to go back to your home country, living in the second country and getting permission to work and live and stay there, or resettlement.
So how does the United States resettlement system work? Well, the first qualification of being a refugee is that you have to have left your home country. The definition for refugee was decided during the United Nations Refugee Convention held in 1951. This definition determines the qualifications that a person must meet to be a refugee, and has been accepted by all countries participating in the United Nations. Refugees are forced to leave their homes and must establish a well-founded fear of persecution to be included in the United Nations Refugee Program. This is different from an economic migrant, someone who chooses to leave their home for a better quality of life. Once the United Nations determines that a person is a refugee, they can then be considered for the next step in the process. The first is repatriation, which occurs when the person can go back to live in their home country. If this is not possible, the second option is local integration. This occurs when the host country, or the country of asylum, allows the refugee to resettle there. When neither of these two options are possible, the third option is resettling the refugee in a third country. However, before the refugee can travel to this country, they must first be accepted. The United States only accepts cases referred by the UNHCR or the U.S. Embassy in the country of asylum. In the United States, these applications are filtered first through the State Department, which implements application criteria and refugee admission ceilings. Eligible cases are then sent to the Department of Homeland Security. During this part of the process, a refugee is interviewed and must fill out the application while still in the country of asylum. They must also meet the additional terms set by the United States definition of refugee. Once approved, a refugee can then travel to the United States, where they will be met upon arrival at the airport by a local resettlement agency. The resettlement organization already has their house furnished and set up, and finally, after on average 18 months of application processing, the refugee is finally at home. So how does this process work in Tennessee? We talked to Holly Johnson, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Office for Refugees, to find out.
This is Holly.
Hi Holly, this is Shannon.
Hey there.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. We receive federal funding from the Office of Refugee Resettlement and distribute it among resettlement and other refugee serving agencies in the state. And we also administer some cash and medical assistance programs for new arrivals. The state withdrew from the refugee program, from the administration of the refugee program. When that happens, and that's happened in 12 other states, the state becomes what's known as a Wilson Fish state. And that means that the statewide program, which is the administration of that cash and medical assistance and social services that I described, that the administration of those pieces of the program are not done by the state, but by a nonprofit within the state. That organization selected by the Office of Refugee Resettlement to administer the program on behalf of the state. So when the state withdrew from the program, they notified the Office of Refugee Resettlement in fall of 2007. They formally withdrew in 2008, and we were selected the beginning of 2008 to serve as the, on behalf of the state in administration of those program components. So we are a nonprofit. We're part of Catholic Charities. We're separate departments than the direct service program of Catholic Charities. I mean, we have contracts with them just like we do all the others. But we are part of Catholic Charities because that's how Wilson Fish programs are set up nationally. Yeah, there's like 3 streams that come to serve refugees in Tennessee. The State Department funds new arrival refugees, the initial generally 30 days, but it can be a little bit longer. The reception and placement of refugees, that's funded by the State Department to resettlement agencies. That does not come through us.
Okay.
The Office of Refugee Resettlement funds resettlement agencies for Match Grant, which is an employment program. That does not come through us. The Office of Refugee Resettlement also funds us for cash and medical assistance, administration of that program statewide, as well as they provide funding for us to give to resettlement agencies for social services, which include job placement, ESL, and case management. And then we have other grants also through ORR that are competitive-based.
On your head.
On is
On the table. On your head. On your nose. On the table. On your head.
Bridge provides services that are all aimed towards self-sufficiency. And I would say there's about 3 legs to that. There's the case management that is very intensive in getting people started in an apartment. So we meet them at the airport, we take them to a fully furnished apartment, they have food available to them, and we connect them to food stamps if they qualify for that. We connect them to health insurance and anything they might need in terms of a doctor. We get them their medical screening, which includes vaccinations, and then we would also look for any medical problems that would impede their ability to work. So if you're eligible to be employed, which is most everyone, then we help you find a job. So we have job club, we have employment training, and we have employment programs. And we have existing relationships with employers to help them to get a first job. Understanding that a first job can mean cleaning, food service, a number of things, where we have people that have training in professional careers, but the first job is something different. And then we have English classes that we do provide in-house. So we have an English teacher, and if people don't know English or they need to improve, they can go to classes 2 times a week, and that is taught by someone funded through Bridge. But we also have a volunteer component to that, so we can have tutors for people and connect them to people, volunteers in the community that will help them more intensively, more than we can possibly do.
Let's see here. And what was it like trying to find a job? Because I know that's like priority number 1. So what was the process of trying to find a job when you came?
Okay, bueno, cuando yo llegué aquí fue muy difícil.
So at first it was very difficult, and she could not work for the first 6 months she was here because she had absolutely no way to take care of the kid because of her child. There was no help for that. But finally now she's been working in a hotel for the last 2 months, and that's because her family is now here and they're the ones that help her with keeping him so she can work. Really the amount of money she makes, I mean, she said, it would have to be a lot more income because the amount of money she makes is just basically to pay for KUB utilities, for the rent, for the child's expenses, her expenses, and really she would need a lot more to be able to afford the daycare.
And he is a college graduate. He studied history in Iraq and worked for 1 year as a teacher.
اسمي نجاة محمد لطيف من العراق.
نجاة محمد لطيف, and she has studied in Iraq. She is graduate from college, psychology, and she has worked for 1 year as a social worker.
Learning English has been one of the more important challenges faced by Najat India.
I'm sure it is challenging, but when there is something like challenging you then, and you insist on doing it, that's the way that you succeed. So she says that they are all insisting on learning the English and persevering, and they feel that they are much better now.
I'm not really a cool maker, but I started doing this thing on my own, and I love working on it.
I'm Kay Ware. I came here as a refugee.
My name is Tasha Abiakubi, and I'm a refugee from Liberia.
Made this one for my grandson.
Kay was a nurse in Liberia, but recertification in the United States proved to be a difficult process.
And I came and I wanted to practice my nursing, to improve when I go back to work. Even the doctor, the medical doctor that I work with in Liberia, the late Dr. Shinda, he's an American doctor. He wrote the board, and there was a lot of things they wanted me to get from back home. It's just like go back in the burning house and see what you can bring.
When we came in the war, you can't go back home to get clothes, to get your papers, to get nothing. We came with nothing.
Childcare, language skills, jobs, and recertification. Although there are already programs designed to address these needs, not all of them are fully implemented in Knoxville, and there are always improvements that can be made.
I think one of our biggest challenges is educating people on who refugees are, that they have a well-founded fear of persecution, that they're legal, that they're admissible to the U.S. based on that fear, that they go through several security channels before they're approved, and that once they get here, they contribute to our economy and not take away from it or drain it.
I think refugees would benefit from a more long-term support. So, like, you know, I said, we have really intensive services for 3 to 9 months. That's not very long. Someone hasn't learned English by then. And while we can refer people and help them to an extent up to 5 years, our priority is always people that first arrived. So if we had more funding, more staff, we could supplement services, we could have a job upgrade, you know, department. You know, the goal of self-sufficiency is a noble one. I think it's a really good component of the resettlement idea. You know, we want people to be self-sufficient, but I think sometimes that comes at a cost, and sometimes the program doesn't allow for people with really serious needs.
Another challenge that this system faces is disagreement in the legislature over how refugee resettlement should function in Tennessee. And then last question, we can talk about the bill that was introduced, HB 1326. Can you kind of give an overview of that bill and how it would affect resettlement agencies?
Oh, sure, it would shut them down.
The argument was they thought that refugees cost too much, that refugees come to Tennessee and use services and end up, you know, costing our state a lot of money. You know, through a lot of community organizing, through, you know, bringing key refugee leaders to the Hill, doing a lot of turnout in the refugee community and other communities to show that this was a bill that, you know, the community in Nashville and Tennessee did not support. We were able to more or less get that bill shelved.
So what exactly is this bill about? HB 1326 or SB 1325 calls for 2 actions: cost assessment and state reimbursement. Resettlement agencies would be asked to gather data on school enrollment, age, and enrollment in public assistance benefit programs. Resettlement agencies would then be charged for these costs. The funds collected would either go to the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities or to the affected state agencies. The committee created to delve into this issue produced a report that concluded that refugee populations actually contributed a net gain to the Tennessee economy. However, this assessment is based mostly on estimates of the number of refugees still in Tennessee, the numbers receiving services, etc. Refugees are legal residents and have social security numbers. The requested data on refugees is hard to collect because such data is not typically collected for people who meet these criteria, i.e. citizens.
Again, just reading, you know, the same thing that you can read and not having any insight to the intent behind the bill. But it doesn't appear that to be looking at any of the benefits that refugees bring. It's looking at the short-term cost. You know, a refugee sits in the ESL classroom in their 2nd grade, you know, elementary school, and the cost of running that class is however much per year, and they're taking up 1 seat, and there's 30 kids in the class, so 1/30 of that dollar amount is going to be charged to the resettlement agency. So first of all, they can't use federal funding that they get to resettle refugees. They couldn't use that to pay this bill. So they'd have to use their own funding. And, you know, agencies aren't raising $116,000 of unrestricted dollars per year. So it would just shut the agencies down.
Yeah, she's saying, like, I would suggest that they make English classes not just at the beginning and but to stay that it's a must. Like someone has to keep going to that English class. Like when Ria started working, that was it with the English. Like he didn't have to go to English classes. But she says it's better if everyone has to keep going to English classes until they know real good English.
To our attention that, hey, look, we're always reacting to legislation instead of being, very proactive in educating people before it even comes up. So we are trying to change that this year. We're working with a technical assistance provider through the Office of Refugee Resettlement to work on some messages and create a communications plan, and we're going to do that in conjunction with our partners across the state.
Well, she thinks that maybe getting her to apply or getting to the Families First program from the beginning would have been better, because instead she got into the match grant program. But then, it didn't really help with childcare. And she feels like if she had had help with the childcare from the beginning, then, or something to help her with that, then she wouldn't have been so with such tight spot trying to get now everything to be able to work.
I mean, I would love to see sort of a grassroots swelling of compassion and sort of motivation to present the refugee message to community and legislators and public officials and state officials, and that would be really cool.
What do you know about refugees living in Knoxville?
I don't really know much about refugees living in Knoxville.
I don't really know much, but I assume that there's some.
The most that I could think of would be people that were displaced from Hurricane Katrina, possibly. Maybe people that have political turmoil going on in their countries.
Did you know there were refugees living in Knoxville before I showed you the questionnaire?
I didn't know what the word refugees was.
So, describe what you know about refugees living in Knoxville.
I don't know anything about refugees living in Knoxville.
Before beginning the survey, did you know that there were refugees living in Knoxville?
I've heard of it, but as I said, I didn't personally know them, but I heard stories from different countries.
Every system can always improve. After speaking with all of these people, hearing their stories and perspectives, it seems like the basic problem is communication. Why don't more people in Knoxville know about refugees? Why didn't the resettlement system enable Daniela to get childcare when the lack of it was clearly the reason she couldn't be employed? Why are Tennessee legislators passing bills that strike so far astray from actually increasing the efficiency of the system? Communication, education. These are the only tools that can overcome misinformation and false preconceptions. And as Holly Johnson said, the resettlement organizations have realized the importance of communication and are implementing programs to encourage education. So what can you do? Ask questions. Volunteer. Vote. Don't shy away from the person that seems different from you. But most importantly, remember that everyone deserves somewhere where they feel safe, a community that they can take refuge in, and a place to call home.